Most people walking around today have absolutely no idea what's really going on behind the headlines. They look at the news, they scroll through their phones, and they see what appears to be complete chaos. Random stories, disconnected events, things that seem impossible to follow, let alone understand. And I get it. It feels overwhelming. It feels like the world has lost its mind, and nothing makes sense anymore. But here's what I want you to consider today. What if it isn't random at all? What if there's actually a hidden thread running through nearly every major story you've seen over the last decade or so, and that thread explains why our institutions feel broken, why the same names keep popping up over and over, and why the rules never seem to apply evenly to everyone? What if the real fight we're witnessing isn't actually about politics at all, but about something far more fundamental? Who gets to define what's true? Who gets to shape the reality you see, the information you trust, and ultimately the decisions you make? Today we're going to pull back the curtain on a hidden system that's been shaping how you see reality, one carefully crafted narrative at a time. And once you see how it works, I promise you'll realize it's been sitting right there in front of us all along. We just weren't looking at it the right way. So, let me start at the beginning. Let me take you back to when this whole thing really started to shift. Because understanding where we are now means understanding how we got here. And it all comes down to one simple discovery that changed everything: the realization that perception could control outcomes far more effectively than evidence ever could. Think about that for a moment. Evidence is objective. It's concrete. It's something you can measure, verify, and argue about. But perception is malleable. It can be shaped, directed, and amplified. And somewhere along the way, certain leaders, certain organizations, certain power structures figured this out. They realized that if you could control how people perceived reality, you didn't need to control reality itself. This wasn't always malicious at first. Intelligence agencies learned it during wartime. Public relations firms learned it selling products. Media organizations learned it competing for attention. But gradually, quietly, these techniques merged. Stories weren't just being reported anymore. They were being crafted, shaped, engineered to create specific emotional responses to guide public opinion in particular directions. And here's where it gets really interesting. Protecting democracy became one of the most powerful phrases in modern politics. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Who could argue with protecting democracy? But that phrase quietly became something else entirely. It became cover for manipulating democracy. It became the justification for actions that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. Now, I want to be clear about something. This wasn't about traditional lies at first. It was far more sophisticated than that. It was about control. And control, my friend, is much harder to detect than simple deception. A lie can be exposed. Control operates in the background, invisible, shaping the boundaries of acceptable thought without you even realizing it's happening. So how did we get to a place where this became possible? Well, part of the answer lies in understanding something we've all experienced: the difference between how someone sounds and what they actually do. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine two people standing in front of you. The first speaks beautifully, eloquent, polished, every word carefully chosen. They smile warmly. They use all the right phrases. They sound presidential, professional, trustworthy. The second person is rough around the edges. They're blunt. They say things that make you wince sometimes. They don't follow the script. They interrupt the flow. Now, here's the question. Which one would you trust more? For years, we were conditioned to trust the polished one. Civility became the ultimate test of character. If someone spoke well, dressed well, behaved according to established norms, we assumed they were acting in our best interests. But what if I told you that polish became a kind of camouflage? What if charm and eloquence started being used as substitutes for actual accountability? Think about it this way. If I want to deceive you, what's more effective? Being obviously dishonest, or wrapping my deception in beautiful language that makes you feel good while I'm misleading you? The professional political class learned this lesson very well. They learned that betrayal hidden behind polite language is far harder to fight than obvious corruption. Meanwhile, the rough, blunt outsider who simply says what they mean, who doesn't play by those polished rules, becomes the villain. Not because they're less honest, but because they threaten the established order. They refuse to participate in the performance. And that's what so much of modern politics has become, a performance. Theater designed to convince you that the system works, that your voice matters, that the people in charge have your best interests at heart. But here's what changed everything, and this is where it all takes a crucial turn. The old megaphones started falling silent. For decades, the pathway to public opinion was controlled by a handful of gatekeepers: major newspapers, television networks, established magazines. If you wanted to reach millions of people with your message, you had to go through them, and they decided what was newsworthy, what was credible, what deserved attention, and what deserved to be ignored. That gave them extraordinary power, not just to inform, but to shape, to decide which stories lived and which stories died, to determine what questions got asked and what questions never even entered the conversation. But something remarkable happened over the past 10 to 15 years. That monopoly collapsed. Not completely, not overnight, but steadily, undeniably, independent voices emerged. Podcasts reached millions without needing network approval. Citizen journalists started breaking stories the establishment media ignored. Alternative platforms gave people access to information and perspectives that would have been invisible just a decade earlier. This shift terrified the establishment. And I mean truly terrified them. Because narrative control was their last real form of power. They couldn't compete on policy outcomes anymore. They couldn't point to improving conditions for ordinary people, but they could control the story. They could decide what you saw, what you feared, what you believed. Except now they couldn't. Not completely. The microphone had been pulled from their hands and handed to anyone with an internet connection and something to say. So, what did they do? They didn't accept defeat. They reinvented the game. If they couldn't control every voice, they'd work to discredit the voices they couldn't control. They'd label alternative perspectives as misinformation. They'd pressure platforms to censor content. They'd coordinate behind the scenes to ensure their version of events remained dominant, even if they no longer had a monopoly. And this brings us to one of the most disturbing patterns of the last several years: the emergence of two Americas operating under two completely different rulebooks. I want you to really think about this, because it's crucial to understanding why so many people feel the system is rigged. Look at how justice gets applied in our country today. Look at who faces consequences and who doesn't. Look at which actions get punished and which ones get excused, explained away, or simply ignored. You can see it over and over again. Political allies commit acts that would destroy an opponent, but they're forgiven. Minor infractions by the wrong people become federal cases. The same behavior draws completely opposite consequences, depending solely on who commits it. Classified documents in a private residence? For some, it's a career-ending scandal. For others, it's a misunderstanding. Refusing to cooperate with congressional subpoenas? Some go to jail. Others face no penalty whatsoever. Meetings with foreign officials? Some are evidence of collusion. Others are routine diplomacy. Do you see the pattern? It's not about the action, it's about the actor. And this does something profound to a society. It destroys trust. Not just trust in specific politicians or agencies, but trust in the fundamental fairness of the system itself. If the rules don't apply equally, if justice depends on political alignment rather than actual guilt or innocence, then the social contract breaks down. People start to believe that the whole system is a sham, that there's no point in following the rules because the rules only bind certain people. That power protects power, and everyone else is just playing a rigged game. And when fairness dies domestically, something even more dangerous happens internationally. Deterrence dies. And it works in reverse too. Inconvenient video evidence can simply vanish. Deleted from platforms, scrubbed from search results, made effectively invisible, even though it still technically exists somewhere. If people can't find it, if it doesn't appear in their feeds, does it really exist anymore? This is the digital illusion, the idea that whoever controls context controls reality. And context online is controlled by algorithms, by platform moderators, by coordinated reporting campaigns that can make something trend or make it disappear based on political calculations rather than actual importance. You've probably experienced this yourself. You remember seeing something, you know you saw it, but when you try to find it again later, it's gone. Not deleted exactly, just buried under so many layers of other content that it might as well not exist. Or you see a headline that triggers a strong emotional reaction. You feel outraged or afraid, or vindicated. But if you actually click through and read the full article, you discover the headline was misleading. The story doesn't quite support the impression the headline created. But how many people actually click through? Most people just read the headline, react emotionally, and move on. The platforms know this. The people crafting these headlines know this. It's not an accident, it's strategy. And the most sophisticated version of this isn't even about individual stories. It's about the cumulative effect of what you're shown and what you're not shown. Your feed becomes a curated reality, showing you a version of the world that reinforces certain beliefs while hiding information that might challenge them. But here's what makes this especially insidious. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like you're seeing the truth. It feels like you're well informed because you're consuming so much information. You don't realize that the information itself has been filtered, selected, arranged to create a specific worldview. And this brings us to the hidden truth that ties everything together, the thread we've been following from the beginning. The system isn't broken. That's what I need you to understand. When you look at all this chaos, all this dysfunction, all this apparent madness, your first instinct is probably to think something has gone terribly wrong, that our institutions have failed, that the system is collapsing. But what if it's not? What if the system is working exactly as it's been designed to work? What if all this chaos, all this outrage, all this division serves a purpose? What if the noise itself is the point? Think about it. When you're overwhelmed by contradictory information, when you're exhausted by constant outrage, when you can't tell what's real anymore because everything feels manipulated, what do? Most people shut down. They stop paying attention. They retreat into partisan bubbles where at least the story is consistent. They give up on trying to understand the truth and settle for whatever narrative feels most comfortable. And that's exactly when you become most controllable. Not when you're ignorant, but when you're confused. Not when you have no information, but when you have too much contradictory information to sort through. Not when you trust nothing, but when you can't tell what deserves trust. The loudest noise, the biggest scandals, the most dramatic controversies, they all serve the same function: distraction. While everyone argues about the latest outrage, while everyone picks sides in the latest manufactured controversy, who benefits? Who's making decisions behind the scenes while you're focused elsewhere? Whose power grows while you're too exhausted to notice? That's the real revolution happening right now, and most people are missing it. Control no longer comes from armies or even elections. It comes from narratives, from the ability to shape what people believe is true, what they think is important, what they fear, what they hope for. The same tools that were supposed to democratize information, that were supposed to give everyone a voice, are being used to manufacture consent more effectively than any propaganda system in history. Because it doesn't feel like propaganda, it feels like your own thoughts, your own discoveries, your own conclusions. But awareness breaks the spell. When you start to question not just what you're told, but why you're being told it, when you start to notice patterns instead of reacting to individual events, when you step back and look at who benefits from your confusion, the illusion starts to collapse. You start to see that most of the things you're told to be outraged about are designed to keep you outraged, not to inform you. You start to see that the people claiming to defend democracy are often the ones undermining it most effectively. You start to see that the real division isn't between left and right, but between those who benefit from the current system and those who are being exploited by it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the real power of awareness. Not that it solves every problem, but that it lets you stop being manipulated by manufactured narratives. It lets you focus on what actually matters instead of what you're told should matter. The truth is simple. When you strip away all the noise, you're most likely being played. We're all being played. The game is most likely rigged as well, but not in the way most people think. It's not rigged to favor one party or another. It's rigged to favor those who control the narrative itself, regardless of their official political label. And the antidote isn't anger. Anger is just another form of control, another way to keep you reacting emotionally instead of thinking clearly. The antidote is recognition, awareness, critical thinking, asking questions that don't have comfortable answers. That's the real revolution. Not rebellion against the system, but recognition of how the system actually works. Because once enough people see it, once enough people start questioning instead of accepting, once enough people refuse to play along with manufactured outrage and deliberate confusion, the whole structure starts to lose its power. You don't need to overthrow anything. You just need to stop believing the lies. Stop accepting narratives at face value. Stop letting others define reality for you. Now, if you found this perspective eye-opening, if something here made you see things a little differently, do me a favor and hit that like button. It actually matters, because it helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. The algorithms I've been talking about work both ways. If enough people engage with content that questions the official narrative, it becomes harder to suppress. Subscribe if you believe truth should never be filtered through political convenience or institutional power. If you believe ordinary people deserve to see reality as it actually is, not as someone wants them to see it. And here's what I really want to know. Tell me in the comments, what moment made you realize something didn't add up? Was there a specific event, a specific story, a specific contradiction that made you start questioning what you were being told? Because those moments of recognition are powerful, and sharing them helps other people have their own moments of clarity. The more we start asking questions, the more we compare notes, the more we refuse to accept easy answers to complicated questions, the more the hidden truth loses its grip. Not because we have all the answers, but because we stop pretending that those in power do. This isn't about cynicism. It's about clarity. It's about refusing to be treated like children who need to be protected from uncomfortable truths. It's about taking back the responsibility to think for yourself, to evaluate information critically, to trust your own judgment, instead of outsourcing it to experts who may not have your best interests at heart. That's the hidden truth they don't want you to see. You're smarter than they think you are. You're more capable of handling complexity than they give you credit for. And you're more powerful than they want you to believe, because the moment you stop accepting their narratives is the moment their control over you ends. So keep questioning, keep thinking, keep refusing to be manipulated by outrage and fear, because that's how this changes. Not through dramatic revolution, but through millions of individual people simply deciding to see clearly instead of seeing through someone else's lens. The truth has been hidden in plain sight all along. Now you've seen it. What you do with that knowledge is up to you.